It's such a pleasure to be here. I always feel so at home at McMaster. You're doing such visionary work that it's a privilege for me to be a part of it, and following Arshad's great lead in trying to do some innovative work. And so I should begin. Most people, because Learning How to Learn launched initially from UCSD in California, University of California, San Diego. Most people think that I am from California, but the reality is that I am from Michigan. So this is me, kind of taking a little break from my day job. Now, as Arshad mentioned, I co-teach the course Learning How to Learn with Terence Sanowski, who's the Francis Crick Professor at the Salk Institute. And here is Terry taking a little break from his day job. So this is one of the great things about online learning. We often think of the benefits for students, and there are definitely benefits for students, but there are benefits for faculty as well. We can make great new connections that are difficult to make in other ways. So I was invited, I was shocked. I was invited to speak at Harvard, right? Here I am, this little Midwestern, engineer, and it's Harvard. I mean, that's like one of the very biggest in the world. And so I went in and I was even more surprised because as I walked into the room, it was standing room only, right? It was packed to the gills. And I just thought, why is there so much interest in this course? And it turns out that our one little course, made for less than $5,000, mostly in a home room in a basement, actually had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. And so what this tells you is something very, very important, and that is anybody can do it, but not everybody does it. And so that's what we'll be talking about today here. Well, what we're going to cover is what have universities been missing about people's needs for education? I think our course gives some insight into that. What are MOOCs? Why do MOOCs matter? And how can universities really improve their way of educating people? How can they reach and help more people? I think insights from our massive open online course can help us to see all of this in a new way with a better perspective. Now, what do we want to have when we're faculty members? Probably the biggest thing that we all hope and dream of is to have an impact, that our work will have an impact. Now, the difficulty is we can do outstanding research, and it's often published in a journal that really only a few people of our peers will ever read. And if you try to reach to a broader public, a challenge is, let's say that you write a nonfiction book and you're like, I'm going to get the word out. I'm going to try and reach more broadly to just let people know what I'm doing or what's going on in this field. What can happen is a typical nonfiction book sells about 250 copies a year. It sells 2,000 copies during its lifetime. So it's really tough a lot of times. I mean, you teach your students in your classes, but reaching out to the greater public is a very, very difficult thing to do. And if you want your work to have an impact, reaching out to the public is what you want to be doing, at least in the most cost-effective manner that you can do that. So I'll give you one example. So I wrote this book called A Mind for Numbers. Now, you may not know something about the publishing industry. When you write a book, here's what happens. The publisher picks the name. As the author, you don't get say-so over what the name of your book is. So, I mean, realistically, would you buy a book called A Mind for Numbers. You know, I mean, it's a pretty bland title, right? This book, believe it or not, went on to become a New York Times bestseller, and it's translated now into 13 different languages. It is incredibly popular. And why is this? Because it was published in affiliation with our massive open online course, our MOOC. When I first began, I was working on the book, and my publisher, Penguin Random House, they did the usual publishing thing, and they're like, Barb, you need to be writing op-eds to the New York Times, the Washington Post, right? This is really important if you want people to know about your book. And I'm like, I don't have time. I'm down in the basement working on a MOOC. And there's just like this silence at the other end of the line. And then finally there's, what's a MOOC, you know? Now for the next book, they're like, you gonna do a MOOC, right? But here's what happened. So I was invited to speak on Science Friday with Ira Flato, who I'm, you know, a big fan of. And I was invited to speak, so there's Ira, and this individual is Ben Carey, and he's a reporter with the New York Times. He wrote a book on education that came on learning that came out at the same time as my book. So, you know, I'm invited on at the same time. I want the New York Times big journalist, right, on this show. I'm just like totally intimidated. So we get to talking, Ben and I, before the show. You know, I'm like, he's with the New York Times. I mean, there isn't bigger impact than that. But we get to talking, and you know, and I'm telling him a little about the MOOC, and I begin to realize, you know, he's the one who's intimidated. I mean, the numbers are really big. And sure enough, my book has done like way better than his book. So don't get me wrong, his book is good. But so what the challenge has been for us as academicians for a long time has been that we are really used to having students who are in a cage. So what do I mean by that? You're here, you're in this classroom, right? And if you were a student at this university, in some sense, you'd be trapped, right? It's the classroom that you have to go to in order to get your degree. You can have kind of a lousy professor who doesn't teach very well, and it doesn't really matter. For me as a professor, all I really have to do is kind of come in and do my time, and I can still get away with it a lot of the time if my research is okay. So professors have gotten used to no competition, right? You might have one or two other professors who can teach the same class as you, but you know, most students, they're stuck with you because this is the only time that they've got available. So universities are really happy with no competition. And what they've gotten used to as well is this idea that the only universe that they really need to care about is the audience of 18 to 24-year-olds, the people who've just graduated from high school. And they've got them caged, and that's the only people they need to worry about. But the real audience of people who actually care about learning is this audience, 18 to 85-year-olds. Universities haven't really thought much about those people because they haven't had ways of reaching them before. So it's, these free-range learners who are often older individuals, it's very difficult for them to, they want new learning, they want to keep up with their learning, but they can't come back, stop everything, come back, go to the university full-time. Even going part-time can be a real difficult thing for their family and so forth, commuting back and forth, even as they have small children. But universities haven't really thought about that audience because they're so used to the much smaller audience of 18 to 24-year-olds. So what I wanted you to think about is kind of reframing that there is a much bigger audience of potential learners out there who universities could really, really help. So let's answer a specific question that I'm often asked, and that is, what is a MOOC? And a MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Course. Sometimes the definition is a little amorphous because sometimes, it may be open. Now it's kind of changing a little bit. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not free, and so forth. But a MOOC in general means a large class that's available online, and it's coming from a university setting, by and large. So MOOCs they're university classes. They're often by leading universities. So, for example, here at McMaster, there's some terrific MOOCs with more coming out soon. And Coursera is a typical provider. A typical MOOC might have on the order of 40,000 students or so. Learning How to Learn, as Arshad mentioned, has right now 2 million, and we just keep adding. So it's growing all the time. Now, you might think that online learning is just not that big a deal because you're here, you see everything around you at the university. But there is a lot happening. One company, for example, Coursera, who McMaster works with, they recently announced funding, a funding round of around $64 million that brings the total valuation of the company to around $800 million. And they're actually approaching unicorn territory, 1 billion as far as the value of the company. What that means is they're essentially like Airbnb and Uber and so forth. And that means they're having a big impact. People are paying money. They think those companies are worth a lot of money because they're doing something that people value. And indeed, we can see in the growth of MOOCs over the last since they began in 2012, this is just cut off at the end of 2016, but actually there's probably around 7,000 MOOCs now. They're growing a lot because people really like them. Just to give you a little bit of a perspective, there are 4 big sort of English language-oriented MOOC providers. And you can think of MOOC providers as being like television stations, or television channels, so like CBS, ABC, and so forth in the US. So Coursera is one of these providers, and it's actually the biggest, and by far, and it's almost hard to keep up with it because they're adding about 500,000 users per month. But they currently have around 27 million users. They are aiming at 200 million as soon as possible, and they're on track to get there pretty soon. So they've got around 2,000 MOOCs now, 150 partner institutions in 28 countries. They take only the elite institutions in the world, which is why McMaster is through Coursera. So there's another provider, sort of second biggest in the lineup, is edX. It's got around 12 million users, 1,400 MOOCs. FutureLearn is another one. It's based out of the UK. It has around 7 million users. Udacity, it has a little bit of a different working model. They don't directly work through universities, but they have university professors and so forth. And they have around 2 million users. They're very prominent in sort of strong business skills or coding skills and those kinds of things. So they have good courses that way. Just by way of contrast, China has, they've got a number of platforms. The biggest platform is Shuitangx, and they have around 7 million. Here's an interesting point about the Chinese platforms. Like with Shuitangx, you can take a course through that and you can get college credit no matter where you are in China. So if you're in Shanghai, you're in Beijing, you're out, in Qiqihar, wherever you are, you can take courses and get college credit. And that's actually very beneficial for students. There are also many other, for example, if you go to Russia, there's a lot of Russian platforms. You go to India, Japan, and so forth. There's a lot of different platforms. Generally, at this point at least, they're smaller than the English-based ones, but they all serve an important need for learners, and we'll talk about some of that. So the next steps, what are the next steps for MOOCs? We've got, well, here's the big thing. So university professors have been terrified of MOOCs. Why? Because, well, they may take your job away, right? So they've been really, really terrified. So MOOC providers have been very diligent to say, you know, don't worry, there's no college credits, these are just ancillary. On the other hand, the next step is they're now working towards college credit. So this is interesting for a very important reason, and that is that MOOCs are, they're a really special entity that is built from academia with a little bit of Silicon Valley, or a lot, and you combine that with some Hollywood. So MOOCs are special because they can be really, really good. And in fact, like it or not, what MOOCs are is the competition for universities. That's forcing, you know, they will eventually be, and even today, be forcing universities to up their game. And that's a good thing because students can greatly, greatly benefit from this. So when it comes to a MOOC, you know, what does a MOOC have for you as a professor if you ever did a MOOC? Well, it's kind of like having your own educational show, and it has endless reruns, right? So, so the only investment you really have is startup time and equipment. So you can do it with your university, or as Terry and I did it, you can kind of do it on your own. Just kind of do the editing and so forth. And sometimes that kind of do-it-yourself approach can be even more effective or just as effective as going through a consortium sort of university level approach, except here at McMaster where they do the best MOOCs. So what other kinds of things? I just want to give you a little sense of what having a MOOC can be like. I can send an email out. So for example, I said, I'm going to go to Silicon Valley. Does anyone want to meet me? So we set up a coffee shop. 45 people show up, right? So I can go to Cape Town or Singapore or, you know, Jakarta. I could go pretty much anywhere in the world, and I can send out an email and say, hey, I'm going to be here. Does anybody want to meet? And suddenly I've got great new friends, and I get, you know, but it's a tremendous way to connect a new community, and we've never had this sort of capability before. But I know probably what's echoing at least a little bit in your mind is this idea that online learning is bad, or at least it's never as good as face-to-face learning. So let's address a couple of the points that are often brought up. First, people will say, you know, but a MOOC has low completion rates. Well, Terry brought up in his discussion last night the fact that there is data. There is incredible amounts of data that we're starting to get. But there are some things we don't get data about. So we tend to think those things don't exist if we don't have data. Now here's the thing we don't have data about. How many people go into a bookstore, pick up a textbook, go like this, and then put it back, right? Do we have data on that? Or how many people buy a textbook, but they only work maybe 1 or 2 chapters, or maybe half the chapters in the book? I would say that if students even read a textbook, you're way ahead of the game, right? And much less actually doing most of the problems and reading things. So we don't have data on completion rates of textbooks. But if we did, we'd be saying, look, we should throw out the textbooks because they have low completion rates, right? So we have this kind of really funny notion of what constitutes completion of things. We only look at stuff for which we have data and for which, you know, we maybe have a desire to see something in a certain light. What about the idea that sometimes they'll say that MOOCs reach only professionals and they don't reach disadvantaged students? So let's think about that. Now, I will admit they reach professionals, but a lot of these professionals are people who are out there who have had no other real good options, right? They're someone who's 35 years old, they're working, they've got a family, they want to keep learning, but they can't stop and go to the university. So does it reach those people? Yes, because the university hasn't been very good at being able to reach to them. I'll give you an example of this. So as I mentioned in yesterday's talk, we often ask our daughters to serve as bit parts in the MOOC, right? Because they were really cheap. And so here is our older daughter, Rosie. And I asked Rosie to model blocking out sound, and she had these kind of chintzy headphones. So it turns out she has these really big honking headphones on her lap. So she was willing to look kind of dorky and model the idea of blocking out sound if you're really trying to focus. And Rosie, as it turns out, at that time, she was in her 3rd year of med school. And she was in class, and there's 75 other students in her class. She was just sitting there, and they were being taught by this preeminent cardiologist. And so, you know, she's just sitting there taking notes. And the cardiologist, he's teaching away, and he suddenly stops the class, points right at her, and goes, you're the girl in the MOOC. So does it reach professionals? Absolutely, but it reaches them with information that they haven't been able to get elsewhere. And it's something that is obviously so good that they're willing, I mean, even a preeminent cardiologist is willing to take the time out of his busy schedule and watch the MOOC. So, but what about disadvantaged students? Well, MOOCs can reach them too, and Terry and I know this because we, for example, in Colorado, there is a group of students. These are, you can see me standing here, and there's, these students are intellectually disabled. They have an IQ of 75 or below. In their lives, what their future perspectives were they would just be warehoused, essentially. They would have an institution, that's where they lived, they would fold napkins, and that was their life. They viewed themselves as incapable of learning. So what some very terrific people, led by Kathy Allen, did was they took our MOOC, Learning How to Learn, broke it up into parts, spaced it out a little bit, and began teaching these intellectually handicapped individuals how to learn effectively. These kids, I mean, if you meet them, they'll tell you all about focused and diffuse modes, how to use the Pomodoro, what is chunking. I mean, and here's the kicker. They are beginning to attend college now. They never even thought they could do anything like this. So if you're thinking that MOOCs are not reaching, the disadvantaged population, that's something that needs to be reconsidered. Here's another example. So, for example, the Dadaab refugee camp near Somalia is they use our MOOC, Learning How to Learn, with some other MOOCs, and they're providing training that can be provided in no other way. So there's tremendous new kinds of things that can be done through these kinds of online learning approaches that can help democratize education in a way we've never been able to do before. So online learning isn't, it isn't just for elites. It's when it is for people who are already perhaps educated, it fills a gap that hasn't been filled before, but it also fills all sorts of other needs that people are having. Now, there's one more thing that people will sometimes say. They'll say that online learning isn't as good as face-to-face teaching. Well, let's think about that for a second. It's a statistical truism to say that half of all teachers are below average. And because average is oftentimes at research universities in particular, the focus is on research, it's not on good teaching. So even average teaching may not necessarily be that good. So online learning provides a great way. My personal preference is I think you can get the very best through both online learning and mixing it in a flipped classroom, but it provides a lot of pluses that in-class just doesn't provide. For example, there'll be someone creaking beside you in a chair, or there's someone going in and out, right? Or somebody's flirting up in front of you, or you just lose track of what the professor is saying, and so you're just being a stenographer, through the rest of the class period. With a MOOC, you can actually, a video, you can stop and replay, and you don't have all this wasted time. So there's a lot of advantages. Now, one thing, so let's take a look here. This is a basketball game in the 1950s. And that's Wilt Chamberlain, is that really tall guy right there. And all of a sudden, in the 1950s, basketball in the US started getting better really quickly. Why was that? It was because of television. All of a sudden, basketball went into living rooms all around the country. Even if you were from a disadvantaged family, you could probably watch basketball on television. And suddenly, the pickup games started getting better. People started seeing the tricks of the very best. And we are in an analogous situation now as far as MOOCs go. Teachers can now watch some of the very best teachers online and see, what kind of tricks are you using to convey Bayes' theorem or thermodynamics. Great teaching often consists of using some of the best tricks that other teachers use. So we're starting to get this kind of thing where, yes, MOOCs are going to be competition, but they're also a great way for you to up your game as a teacher. So what is our biggest challenge? So everybody knows a cemetery, right? So here's the thing about cemeteries. They're kind of like universities, right? It's really hard to move a cemetery, and you can't expect any help from the inhabitants. And that's what universities are often sort of facing. There's this institutional inertia, and it can be very difficult to kind of consider new approaches, new outreach, and so forth. And so this is the kind of thing that we're often facing, is how do we make institutional changes in how to make an impact and really help people when they need to be helped. So let me just kind of give you a little insight into how not to make a MOOC. So here's version A of how not to make a MOOC. So if you look, MIT, they pioneered OpenCourseWare, which was a tremendous idea. And what they did was they recorded a lot of teachers in classrooms, and they put the materials all online. And it was a terrific beginning to try to make material available for people. And as you can see, here he is writing slowly away on the blackboard while he's talking, and it is the most boring stuff, right? So then universities said, okay, We realize that you can't just film somebody in a classroom, that's pretty boring if you do that. So let's try, we're gonna do something new. We're going to, have a person and we'll have bullet points, right? So this is so new. I mean, it's really different, right? Oh, no, we'll try a different technique. Let's try, we'll put a picture in on the side, right? So you go to a lot of MOOCs now, and what you'll see is a person kind of droning away on one side of the screen and bullet points or pictures coming up, and it's really dry. So when you say online learning isn't, it may not be as good as face-to-face, if you're thinking of those kinds of things, that is really the case. But as I mentioned, there's competition in MOOC making as well. So what are you going to do? Are you going to watch a MOOC that's on the subject matter you really need, that's kind of boring and that has old-fashioned presentation, or are you going to watch a MOOC that has the same subject matter, maybe is a little funny, and kind of has some a little bit of Hollywood sizzle? You'll go for the second one every time. And there's a wonderful website called classcentral.com, and you may wish to note that down. This is a MOOC. It's sort of like Amazon's reviews of books. You can go in, do a search for any sort of MOOC that you're interested in. Let's say you're interested in Laura Ingalls Wilder, who wrote the Little House of the Prairie books, or Hungarian literature, whatever you might be interested in. You can put that in the subject line, the subject search line in classcentral.com, and go do a search, find MOOCs that are on that subject, and then actually see what people's ratings are for that MOOC. And so if you're looking for data analysis and you want to see what the best courses are, you can actually find it through Class Central. So, here's another one that people do is the bookcase background syndrome. I mean, this can work like if you're on Skype or something, but I can't tell you how many people have come up and said, I've been asked to do a MOOC. I think what I'll do is I'll kind of set it, and I'll be like in my study, and I'll have books behind me. And not only that, but having books behind you makes it really cluttered and makes it hard for you to add in any other kinds of visuals. So what I'm going to do here is just walk you through just a little bit of suggested methods for great MOOC making that Terry and I have sort of developed by the seat of the pants, but seems to work really quite well when we made Learning How to Learn. So there are many other approaches. A big thing that I'd like to say is that pre-planning pays off. The more you can plan carefully what you're going to be doing, the better off you're going to be. Now, behind a great MOOC, there's always cheerful, friendly professors. Sometimes if you have people who are learners, they have enough kind of stuff going on in their lives. They've got to deal with the kids, picking up the kids. They've got work issues. They've got all sorts of negative or difficult things. So the last thing they want to see is someone who's just here to teach you this material, right? They want somebody who's a little bit bigger than life or fun. Who is it? Guy, the television chef. What is his first? Guy Fieri, yeah. So what Guy Fieri does, he will go sometimes and he will visit the restaurant 2 weeks before filming. And he's just perfectly normal, low key. And then he comes for the filming. And he is Guy Fieri. I mean, he is on. He is really lively and so forth. And people just love it, right? It's bigger than life. It's not actually his normal persona, but it's kind of fun for people. I mean, you want to be inspired about what you're trying to learn about. So being a little bigger than life is actually a good thing to do. And it's hard to get someone, to turn that part on if they've always been a bit of a subdued college professor. And not only that, there's this camera staring at you, right? But you get used to it, and you get used to it pretty quickly. So trust me, if you ever saw the first videos of me, I was like, I'm staring into the barrel of a shotgun, right? So if I could do it, really, anybody could do it. So now another thing that great MOOCs will have is good metaphor and imagery. And we spoke yesterday about the fact that metaphor and good images can really lift people's understanding very, very quickly. So taking time with imagery, one important thing is don't just like if you're used to maybe writing textbooks, what you do with textbooks is you do a data dump of a picture. So you've got the complete picture, all the ideas. You can't do that with a MOOC because having too many things appear on screen at one time can be confusing for people. So you have to kind of have part of it, then another part, then a bigger part, and that's how you kind of gradually construct people's understanding. Another thing is motion. So attention to sort of how things move in the video. And I'm going to play you a little video snippet so you understand what I mean here. Of course, humor is also very important. So it's all too neglected because you tend to think that, I just got to convey the material. But if you're competing with other MOOCs, it is very important. The advertising industry, they kind of have a rule of thumb that every 6 seconds something changes on the screen. And sure enough, that what'll happen is if you're staring at something and nothing changes for a while, your attention will start to wander. So if you have something changing, it will bring that attention back up. The one thing is just standing there and moving your hands doesn't count as anything changing. It's too predictable. So that's why you've got to have some things going on, and I'll give you an example of that. So what I'm going to show you now is just a little snippet from a video from Mindshift that was done here at McMaster. So you'll see a great sort of endorsement of McMaster in there. But I snipped it a little, so it will have the intro, then there'll be kind of a little bit of an abrupt, and you'll see me standing in my basement, and then it'll go on from there. So here we go. Scenes in our basement, and if the scripting and editing process actually gives you a sense of what's going on behind the scenes in a fair bit of online learning, so you can make better decisions about what works for you. You can see the green screen here. It's just a cheap cloth on a frame that we bought online. You can see the rest of the basement around me. There's the teleprompter hood, the edges of the lights here, and there's the fireplace and the edges of the room. How do green screens work? Well, I just stand in front of it like this. Then we crop using a video editing program to get rid of the stuff on the edges. Then we stick whatever background we want behind me, just like the weather person at your local TV station. I can be in the jungle or the city. We can even just stick in an animation from PowerPoint. This is all a pretty straightforward process, although trust me, just like anyone, when I first tried to do it, I had my share of frustrations. Notice the infinite effect that we simulated by just draping the cloth gently forward. You might be surprised to learn that even top-notch MOOC making facilities that I've toured around the world often don't have a full-length green screen. Why might a full-length green screen be important? Because from an evolutionary perspective, things that suddenly loom closer to you were more likely to kill you. So a motion that appears to jump closer, as when you go from full body to half body on video, activates all sorts of neural attention layers. Motion of all types, especially unexpected motion, really attracts attention. So that gives you just a little sense of, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's not that difficult to do. When I had troubles video editing, I would just ask a local high school kid. But here's the funny thing. So when I was at Harvard, I was like, you guys, this is not rocket science. Don't say that at Harvard. So now I want to show you just a little, humor is so important, and it's important for a number of different ways. For one thing, it's like it gives you a little intellectual break. So, and other things, it sort of just kind of uses different parts of your brain. Maybe that helps relax you a little bit, but it also can help take you off that pedestal, right? So you're not this, very distinguished professor who, is sort of at arm's length. It makes you more approachable, and that makes the learning something that's more fun and easier to do. So in this video, this gives you just a quick little sample of humor. Terry has just gone through an extended and really quite a in-depth discussion of neurotransmitters. So he's just done that, and then he does this little aside.
This brings us to zombies. Zombies can't learn. It is also clear from their behavior that they have brain damage, especially in the front of their cortex, which is the part that makes plans.
So, it's just a little, as a side, just kind of popping in out of there, and people just love it. And it also just, it shows that Terry he's got a good sense of humor, and that he's really an approachable person, not this professor who's on high. Now, what are some of the differences between teaching in class and in a MOOC? Well, in class, the instructor controls the presentation. So what this means is that you can stay up late at night, right? Or get up really early in the morning and you just doing your last minute, putting things together. You can't do that with MOOCs, which sometimes makes MOOC making a little bit difficult, because professors are like, well, I do that for my regular classes, why can't I do it for this MOOC? And what happens is with MOOCs, you're working with a team. And so you've got sort of extensive collaborative efforts involved in making sure everything, you want to develop a good script, you want to make sure the illustrations are appropriate for what you're doing. And so the problem is we have this sort of institutional idea that whenever it comes to a class, the professor is the boss. And so when it comes to MOOCs, it sort of defaults to this idea, well, the professor is the boss of what's in the MOOC. But here's the challenge. Professors don't know squat about MOOCs. So they often can kind of come up with things that work in a regular classroom, but just don't work at all in video form. So this is why sometimes a good team can be very helpful. Should you teleprompt or not teleprompt? Some people, I would say, out of 5 professors who say, I don't teleprompt, I can speak extemporaneously, and I'm really good, one of them is right. And the other 4 are they get up there, they dither, they make mistakes, they're really not as good at all as you think they are. And I'm a believer in sort of the Steve Jobs philosophy. If you remember back in the day, when you would open your computer to boot it up, it'd be like 2 to 3 minutes where it's booting up. And Jobs was like, no, can't have this. Think of all the millions of wasted minutes that are out there. I want you to just open it and flip it up. Every second counts. If that approach is taken to MOOC making, that turns out to be very beneficial, because students can tell if you're kind of dithering around and you haven't pre-planned and so forth. Some things, it can work out okay and the professor's methodology can work well, but other times it can be exceptionally beneficial to have pre-scripted something. And if you pre-script, the nice thing is you can get your images in mind, you can get the metaphors in mind, and everything is, and people will ask me all the time, they'll say, how do you remember all this stuff? And I'm like, I don't remember, it's all the teleprompter, but they they can't tell, so thank goodness. So I found that we did our initial shooting with a 15-inch on the diagonal teleprompter. It was really hard. So sometimes when you catch me full body, that means the camera was rolled back, and I'm kind of going like this, trying to read it, you know. But a bigger teleprompter made that go away. It's really, I flub a lot less as well. So I highly recommend a 4K camera if you can afford it, because you can pull back, film full body, and then still have enough you know, pixel density that you can close in on the same shot. So you really only have to shoot one time, although it can be kind of nice to have a backup set of shots as well. Now, I want to bring up what's going on in YouTube right now. So I was recently in New York City filming with a wonderful linguist named Benny Lewis. He goes by Benny the Irish Polyglot. And what happens is, YouTube, if you have 10,000 or more followers on YouTube, you get free access to the YouTube studios anywhere in the world. And these are freaking awesome studios. They have $50,000 8K cameras available with all the training and everything that you can use for free if you're a YouTube star. So YouTube is directly tackling television, and in some sense that means they're directly tackling what's going on in online learning in education. So the challenge is that editing film is time consuming, but it's not necessarily really hard to do. Really, you can pretty much learn how to do it. I mean, it's not that hard. You can also find people who will edit for a low cost. For example, you can have someone in Hungary do the editing for you so that you can send them a video the night before, have them edit with proxy files, and then they're back to you at a very reasonable price by the next morning. So this stuff, getting editing done is just not hard. The more that you are in control of what you're producing, the better the product will be. So unfortunately, the way that some MOOCs are contracted for is like this. It's like, I need a specialization, I need 40 hours on how to manufacture stuff. I want you to make a MOOC on this. So you've just been told you've got to do 40 hours. What are you going to do? Fill it with filler, right? I mean, let's have a lengthy discussion with someone, let's have some montages. And it can be really expensive to produce this kind of thing, and students don't really like it. It's not very well done. One university system, a major university system in the US, which I shall leave unnamed, spent $2 million producing 8 MOOCs, had 300 students over several years, and finally just shut it down. So high production quality does not equate to making good MOOCs. Actually, it's the personality and the care that the professor themselves takes and the unit that you're working with. If you have a really good collaborative MOOC making unit and you have a good professor, you've got gold. So just another little insight, project management, you can use something like Trello, is a great way to keep yourself on track. So McMaster and I, the great video editors and I we worked through Trello, so we would kind of keep track of what each other was doing. Now there is one, I do have to say, I had this one secret behind the scenes that you will not have available to you, and that is my husband. So he was the man behind the camera, and handling the audio and so forth. So actually, I couldn't have done it without him, and it just made filming the whole thing a lot more fun. A nice thing was, because a lot of the filming was done in our basement, we could just go in and, we didn't have to worry about taking somebody else's time and so forth. I will admit, though, that sometimes I would I would flub, I'd read from the teleprompter, I'd flub again, and then I'd be like, my diva mode would come out. I just can't do this, and off I'd go. And my husband is like, okay, lunch is coming up, you can do this, right? So when it comes to script writing, write the first draft of the script, so visualize it, kind of keeping that in mind, that every 6 seconds you want something going on. Add occasional emphasizing words so they can fly up on the screen, kind of add things and keep matters interesting. Avoid fluff that fills up time, but it's kind of extraneous. Make every second count, as I mentioned. Okay, now you might think you want to make things interesting, right? No, interesting is the kiss of death. Interesting means that it's something you as a professor find interesting, right? But it isn't necessarily something that students are going to find relevant or useful. So everything you want to put forth in a way that it's relevant and useful and if possible, practical for students. So learning how to learn, I must mention that let's say that when MOOCs were first coming out, there was no MOOC on learning how to learn. And in fact, at most courses, or most universities, there's no courses on learning how to learn. I mean, maybe a few here and there, but nothing of any consequence at most universities. So let's say that that someone had gone to a school of education somewhere and said, I've heard that if you make a MOOC on learning, it will be a big hit. They would, and then say, okay, I want you to do one. They would have said, great, we'll make a MOOC on learning for teachers. What's wrong with this picture? We always keep thinking that it's the teachers that need to know about learning, and they're the only ones interested. But the sheer number of students interested in our MOOC around the world tells you it's learners themselves who are interested in this kind of thing. But then, let's say I said, no, it's not supposed to be a MOOC for teachers. It's supposed to be for learners as a whole. What they would have created was 2 weeks, a MOOC with 2 weeks on the history of education, 2 more weeks on theories of education, 2 more weeks on how babies learn, and then a tiny little bit on the end, about how people learn, but just one small lecture on neuroscience because it's too hard to understand, right? So what Terry and I did was flip that completely on its head. We provide theories, but when we provide them, they're always relevant, always in context, and if it's anything controversial, we put the actual reference right up behind us so that people can see where we're coming from. So it's very well grounded in the research literature, but it's also really relevant for students. So, a big thing, of course, is avoid academies. Since I wear 2 hats as a professor and as a popular book writer, I am really aware that there's this problem that we academicians have, and that's whenever we write something, it's like super boring. It's so pedantic, and when I write something, when I first write something for a popular book, it comes out in academies, and then I have to rewrite it to translate it into something that actually is readable and that people like. So it's almost inevitable if you're writing a script that it will come out to be kind of pedantic, and you really have to, it's the edits, it's going back through it afterwards that makes the difference. So it's important to build interaction with the medium, so you can point, you can duck, a lot of times people just think, I'm reading from the teleprompter, whatever happens here, I don't care. Or maybe I will kind of point like that. But there's ways that you can, I'll just give you one little.
Here's what we do know. If the music is fast and loud, it disrupts reading comprehension, in part because you use some of the same areas of the brain to process music as you do to process language.
So I could have just made this into a little boring video of, should you listen to music when you're studying? Here's what research shows. And instead, it's this weird, creepy head that comes up. And then I'm kind of like, oh my God, It makes the subject matter, and you can do this kind of making things more interesting actually pretty easily if you have a great group to work with, as McMaster is here. So I'm just gonna, this has no sound on it, but it just gives you a sense of how can you show the kinds of ideas that I was showing or talking about yesterday with relation to a metaphor for focused and diffused modes. See how I'm actually standing there by the pinball machine, and you can get a better sense of how that pinball machine is working. And then I can, bring things up. I'm full body beside it. And so it's not like some arrow pointing. I'm the arrow. And so I'm, like communicating as a real person, even as I'm showing what's going on. So, so these are the kinds of things that you can put in your MOOC. These are all free GIFs that are available through Wikipedia. A lot of times people only think that you can put some kind of still picture, but having moving imagery is the more you can get motion in there, the better off you'll be. And these kinds of things they're out there, they're available for free, and you just have to note them accordingly. Another thing that I often do is I kind of collect stuff. So, for example, here, this is my son-in-law down in Chile playing some soccer. That footage would have cost around $500. But, it's like, hey, it's my son-in-law. So he just did it, and it's really easy to do. This is me I was just sort of doing diffuse mode, sitting in a taxi in Guatemala or something. And then here, I'm not sure if you saw this, but at the very end, I'm in bed talking about sleep and the importance of sleep. And so then I cut to showing me in bed. So the thing is, there we go. You can have more fun. You can do stuff that you can't do in normal classes. Just a little sense of the outreach. We have 3 different platforms, non-English platforms at present, with more growing. So this one is, we have a co-instructor, Orlando Trejo, and that's the Spanish platform of learning how to learn. So he has a large community that's developing in the Latin American countries and Spanish-speaking countries. And it's amazing the kind of community you can build. So for example, every Friday, except I haven't sent it. This morning I was like, I haven't sent my Cherry Friday yet. But I send an email out to now it's 1.1 million people get my email. So have you ever had that thing where you like going to press the button in the email and it's like, should I send it, right? So every Friday I'm like, okay, because it's 1 million people, except one time. So one time we were driving up to Canada, my husband and I, and it was Thursday night, and I was editing the Cheery Friday email. We hit a bump. I accidentally hit press, send, and off it went. Yeah, so it was a Cheery Thursday by accident. But this is a tremendous way to build community. And also, see, what's happening now is there's lots of non-academic people who are going out there and putting stuff out there, and they don't really know what's credible and what's good. You can go and find some little courses, on some small providers, and they'll talk about things like how important and good the learning styles are for you, right? Which, of course, isn't at all in line with what research is finding. I was very amazed to go on to a website of one provider and find the entire copy of Learning How to Learn was on this website, uploaded by somebody else who was claiming to be the instructor. So, some of these websites, you just have no idea what you're getting. And with Coursera, it's really clear, Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, and so forth, you're getting something that is backed by a university's reputation. So just, I'd just like to, as we're wrapping up here, let's say that we're talking about improvement, in versus effort in, for example, university level teaching. So what's happening now is we're trying to improve teaching at a university. And what happens is people concentrate on professors, improving professors. So they put a whole bunch of effort, so there's a lot of effort, and they get a little bit of improvement. Because they've been working on this for years. I mean, you're talking to pretty much the true believers who are going to come to your workshops and so forth. But we forget it's the learners themselves who really want and need some additional help to improve their learning. If you put the effort on students, what happens is for every effort you put in, you get a lot of, because we haven't really focused on that before. So it's a great new territory, I think, for universities to be focusing on. I like to say that MOOCs are like dating. What happens when you date, right? You date, you want to look your best. If you have a cold, you might cancel because you don't want to be, like infecting your partner, right? And you put on your best clothes, you go out there, and that's what you do when you're dating, right? That's what MOOCs are like. MOOCs are you put your best performance out there. In fact, every video can be one of the best performances you've ever given in your life because you can toss it out and do it again. You can prepare it. You can have every word scheduled. You can have all sorts of great imagery. It's a fantastic medium. Now, classes, on the other hand, are kind of like marriage, right? What you see is what you get. Honey, sorry, bed hair, So it can really make a difference in people's lives. We are at the ground floor of a learning revolution. What are you waiting for? Thank you so much.
Another great talk.
Okay.